Lake Effect brings you conversations about what's happening in Milwaukee and the people, places, and organizations that shape our community. This is Lake Effect Spotlight from WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.
Wisconsin voters will decide on April 1st who will be the state's superintendent of public instruction. Incumbent Jill Underly is facing a challenge from education consultant and former teacher Brittany Kinser. Kinser previously led the City Forward Collective, a nonprofit organization. Before that, she oversaw a public charter school network in Milwaukee. Kinser joins WUWM education reporter Catherine Kokel to share how she hopes to approach the job if elected.
What are your top priorities? Maybe the top 3 to 5 if you're elected.
So my top one, and this is why I got in the race, is to restore our high standards. That'll be the first. Then making sure that we are refocusing on teaching reading, writing, and math so that all children can get a meaningful job, go to college, or master a trade. And then ensuring that the, billions of dollars that's spent on education is getting into the classrooms and rewarding our great teachers and not making, creating more bureaucracy. Also, with the Department of Public Instruction, making sure that it's transparent, making it really easy for families, schools, school boards, school districts to find the information we need, making sure that it's predictable and responsive, and ensuring that it's innovative. So we have the best practices available for, again, for our schools, our parents, our school boards, the community, and ensuring that 95% of children, in the end, 95% of children are reading well enough so they can have a meaningful career or go to college. We know that it's possible.
When you say rewarding teachers, I assume that means increasing pay. Where do you anticipate finding money for any sort of benefits or increase to salaries for teachers in Wisconsin?
Yeah, so I'm all about making sure that we modernize the funding formula. It is a very complex funding formula. So I have promised people throughout Wisconsin, as I have traveled across the state, making sure that we modernize it so that right now so many taxpayers, like, they're taking the burden, right? And so making sure more of that goes on to the state. I'm not an expert in the funding formula, so we do need experts, but I will be an advocate and leader on that. I also believe that we need to have a higher reimbursement for special education. Right now, we're like around 30%. So, for example, when I was running my elementary school our first year, we spent over $1 million on special education. And then we didn't get reimbursed until the next year. So we do need to have a higher reimbursement rate. I don't know what is possible for that. That would be conversations between the legislature, the governor's office. We have to find something. We have to work together. And that's something I can do is work. I've shown that I can work with both sides of the aisle and the governor's office to get things done. So that higher reimbursement of special education, and then also which will help with more money in the budget, right? Also making sure that we have a higher reimbursement in the rural areas for transportation, and also just like helping school districts when they need it. Like, how are you spending your money, right? And how can you be creative in the way that you are? And I don't know if creative's the word, but being efficient and making sure that teachers are, the money is getting into the classrooms and not on other things. But again, reimbursement and special ed, increasing that, rural transportation, and modernizing the funding formula.
Thank you. How are you going to balance the needs of public and private schools? DPI is obviously an institution that is tasked with regulatory oversight and licensing of public school teachers, but you've expressed some interest in parental options. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so DPI has to follow the law there, right? So I want to remind everyone, DPI is not the legislature. We don't make laws, but we have to follow the laws. And so I want to ensure that all children are able, 95% of our children are learning how to read. That is why I got into this race. When she lowered the standards, I thought that I was shocked because it made it look like more kids are prepared, but that's not what's best for kids. We've got to be brutally honest about where they're at and ensure they're getting the reading instruction they need, the interventions that they need. So I see there are children here in Wisconsin, they are, when we talk about the private schools, what is it? It's less than like 10% of children that are in, using a scholarship, um, going to a private school. And many of those children are living in socioeconomically disadvantaged communities. And I would like to start talking about the families that are choosing to use that scholarship. This is not an object. It's not just this voucher thing. These are families in Milwaukee. And I specifically, when I'm thinking about the families, I'm thinking about the families I've worked with here in Milwaukee. We have almost 40,000 kids going to the private schools, or maybe it's 30,000. I might be down, the numbers might be a little different there, but their families who are choosing to use that scholarship, they've had this choice for 30 years. And when you talk, like, we need to make sure we're talking with the families. Like, why are they choosing the scholarship program? Like, why aren't they going to the district? But getting back to it, like, I'm focused on, majority of our families still are using the traditional public schools. That's what we use. That's what they choose for their child, like 800,000 kids. We got to focus on everyone. The attack has been on me that, oh, you're also focusing on the private schools. Well, we have children that are in those schools, and we have children in public charter schools. We have children in the virtual schools. We have children homeschooled. I feel like I'm missing one. Oh yeah, open enrollment. I'm about all children in our state being prepared to have a meaningful career, go to college, or have a meaningful career.
What types of challenges would you expect if you are elected to this job?
So I think the challenge is I'm not accepting the status quo. We have to admit there needs to be a change. I haven't talked to anyone out there in our state or outside of the state that thinks 3 out of 10 children reading well enough to go to college or get a career is acceptable. Everyone is shocked, right? I'm not going to accept the status quo. The challenge will be just in any type of change where we're going to be focused on making sure the kids are learning and making sure that the Department of Public Instruction is meeting and exceeding expectations for our customers. When I say customers or clients or people that rely on us, are our schools, our school boards, our parents, right? Like, so there is a part of DPI that needs to be responsive. And right now, like when I called DPI the other day, I had to wait 10 days before someone got back to me. That's too long. So I will make sure that we're doing an assessment of where are the areas that DPI is doing really well, and what are the areas that we need to do better so that we can provide the best service possible to our schools, school boards, and parents, all in the name of making sure our kids are learning and having the best, education possible in Wisconsin. So I think anytime there's change, there's going to be some challenges.
As we're finishing up here, I just have a couple of issues that are specifically relevant. We are obviously based in Milwaukee, and so there are a lot of issues that are coming up right now for Milwaukee voters. How do you view school resource officers, their efficacy, and how to implement them best in Milwaukee?
So with the SROs, that was a law again, right? Like a law that they needed to put SROs into the schools. I wasn't a part of those conversations. I'm not, I don't work for the city or Milwaukee Public Schools, but that was a law. And then when you see how many calls have been made every day to help in the schools, you could see why that came about, right? So I support, following the law. The mayor has said it, the governor has said it. Now, MPS school board too, like yes, let's do it, right? And so I do believe SROs need to be trained to be able to work in schools. And it can be like a really wonderful experience. Like they're trained, it's different. I already know that police already have training, but then to work in a school with children, I do think you need to have training for that. I think it's helpful. And building a relationship with not only the kids, but with the families and the school teams, it can be like a really wonderful experience, right? To have that another great relationship with an adult in your community. And so I think, the SROs can be like another champion for our kids. But I do think that they need to be trained like and working with children. Not that they don't already have training, but it's different working in a school with kids all day. So
My last question is also kind of Milwaukee specific, and it's in reference to the audit that the state ordered of MPS schools. There were 29 point action plan to basically overhaul the operation of the school district. How would you oversee that action plan and make sure it gets implemented? Where would the accountability be if you were to lead DPI?
Yeah, so I think it's really important you can see from the results for kids and then reading results and then seeing the audit, right? It is in disarray. I want to have an office in Milwaukee so that we can be supportive right away, so that we can partner with the new superintendent. She's going to need support. And then making sure that we are being very transparent about where MPS is at and giving that information to the board and the community. And then how we're supporting them. We want the accountability, but we need to be supportive also. And so I see us, again, being a great partner to ensure more kids are able to be successful and we can get to 95%. Our kids here in Milwaukee, I've started a school on the south side and north side. They're so excited to go little K4s. I don't know how much time you've spent in schools, but little 4-year-olds are so excited to come to school. They're like, hi, and they're relying on adults, right? And our families here too are relying on us, on educators, to ensure that their children are being taken care of course, like safety always first and cared about. And then that we're teaching them how to read and do math so they can be successful. And so I'm looking forward to being able to work with the new superintendent in the schools and coming up with there are other cities that are making huge progress and we can learn from them. It's possible. I'm excited about the potential of, hopefully I get through and really creating an amazing school district because they deserve it. Year after year, you can see what's happening and our community deserves an excellent, and I say our because I live right here, right? Excellent school district for our children. And we know there are other examples outside of Milwaukee to show how to do it, and we can even do it better.
Brittany Kinser is a candidate for state superintendent. She spoke with WUWM education reporter Catherine Kokel. Also on the ballot is the woman who currently holds the job, Jill Underly. Prior to her election in 2021, Underly was the superintendent of the Pecatonica Area School District, which is southwest of Madison. She's also worked as an assistant director for the Department of Public Instruction, and she was a public school teacher and administrator. Underly joins WUWM education reporter Catherine Kokel to discuss the challenges of leading a school system in a state where the birth rate is declining and where per-student funding hasn't kept up with inflation.
Let's kick it off by talking about your priorities. What are the top 3 to 5 things you hope to address if you are reelected?
Yeah, so the first is going to be public school funding. We need to make sure that we have sustainable, predictable revenue in all our public schools, and that's really the main priority. The other priorities are, teacher recruitment and retention, making sure that we attract great teachers to Wisconsin and that we're able to keep them. So that's priority number 2. Priority number 3 is probably a 5-way tie, but we need to make sure that we have mental health supports for students in our schools, and that we're supporting kids, especially after we find out, through our youth risk behavior survey data that our kids are still really struggling with anxiety and depression, and food insecurity. So making sure that we have, pieces in place that support kids in their educational journey. So mental health, nutrition, and other elements of belonging and inclusion.
When you said recruit and retain quality teachers, how do you plan to do that?
Yeah, so the first part is, I guess, good news. I mean, we are preparing enough teachers in Wisconsin through our UW system and our private school college partners. But the second part of that is that we're not doing enough to keep them. And there's a lot of, things that kind of feed into that. The biggest finding we have is that we don't compensate our teachers as well as other states. So like in Illinois, for example, they're paying teachers 20% more than teachers in Wisconsin are earning. But another reason teachers leave, it's not just all about compensation, it's about support. As our school districts have had to reduce their budgets because they're not getting enough revenue. They've cut positions that traditionally would support teachers, support professionals like people who would do, like classroom aides, recess aides, food service, playground supervision, bus supervision. I mean, there's a bunch of things that we've been cutting back on. And so teachers' working conditions have changed rather dramatically in the past 15, 20 years. So we need to address that. We also need to address, mental health. We need to address partnerships, I suppose I could say, between our schools and our communities so that there's more support for our public schools. So I think overall, it's what the teachers are telling us is that their working conditions need to improve as well for them to stay.
This next question I asked your opponent, and I want to throw it to you as well. How do you plan to balance the needs of public and private schools? DPI is obviously tasked with regulating public schools, licensing and regulating teachers in the public sphere. Is there space for the state superintendent of public instruction
Mhm.
to balance the needs of public and private schools? How have you approached that in the job, and how do you plan to approach that?
So we follow the law. In the current law or statute, the Department of Public Instruction does have some regulation of private schools that are in the choice program. So like if you go to our website, for example, we do have, we do administer some financial aspects. Actually, all the financial aspects that are public dollars come from DPI as like a flow through agency. We handle their audits and their financial reports. We also monitor some of their assessments that they do that are regulated by the state. So we already do some things, related to the schools that are in the private school choice program. But the issue for me has always been that we are we are funding two systems in the state of Wisconsin. We're funding a public school system which accepts all kids and is regulated, significantly so. Like when you look at teacher licensing, when you look at school report cards, when you look at even when schools can start. And then we are also funding a private system with public dollars, and they don't have nearly the number of regulations or the accountability that public schools have. And so as the superintendent of public instruction, I'm trying, it's difficult to balance the fact that you have one system that accepts all kids and they are overseen by school boards that are locally elected. And then you have another system, the private choice system, which doesn't accept all kids, yet still takes public money and doesn't have the oversight of locally elected officials because they're getting those public dollars too. So for me, it's a philosophical thing, but it's like we have laws that we have to follow, and we definitely follow the law.
What are the challenges you see ahead if you're elected to a second term in this office, and how do you address
Yeah.
them? How do you overcome them?
Yeah. I mean, school finance is definitely a big piece of that. And as you said, the number of referendum are continuing to increase. They're also larger in dollar amounts than they used to be. And some of that has to do with the fact that the private school systems are expanding and they're taking more public dollars because we're not getting an influx of more money into the education budget as a whole. The piece of pie that goes to private school choice is just getting larger. And so you see these whopper referendum in a lot of communities, especially the urban communities, because they are, millions of dollars of their operating budget is going to private school choice. In some of these rural communities, I mean, we've not been able to keep up school funding with inflation. And so you see more and more, it's like these high stakes referendums where for these rural communities, it's a non-recurring referendum that might be like a third of their operational budget. And if it fails, they have very limited options. And so we're seeing more and more. It's kind of like coming to the brink when it comes to school finance. So we need to do something. That's definitely a challenge. And one of the solutions is to stop, paying for two systems.
On the student achievement front, you have been criticized for changing state standards. I wonder how you
Yeah.
defend that decision and how you look at the future of student achievement, especially in a declining enrollment situation that we are in here.
Yeah, so, I guess when I come back to this, the decision was made with the best interest of kids, right? And we need to stay focused on what's best for kids. And our test should measure what kids are actually learning in our schools. And it should not be tied to national politics. And changing the cut scores to reflect what kids were learning on the Wisconsin test and not reflect what they're learning on a different test is just good policy. And that helps teachers understand, what they need to be teaching, where kids are in their educational journey, where they need more support, where they need to be more challenged. And it was also good policy, like I said initially, for students and for families too, to understand how their students are doing. I guess the side of it that's that support that's saying that standards were lower. I mean, they're absolutely wrong. I mean, that's two different things, right? There's the standards that kids are tested on, and then there's the cut scores or the bands or the grading scale, as you want to call it, that determines where they're at. And by adjusting that grading scale, we made sure that we were understanding where kids were actually performing on the standards, which we, they're challenging. We do, of course, going forward, we bring in new standards, we take out old ones. We did add a literacy score for each child on their forward test so that they understand and their parents understand and their teachers understand where they're performing in literacy as compared to other kids in the district, which I think is really helpful. So, I mean, we just have to keep our eye on it. We always have to make sure our standards are high. And that our kids are being challenged because that's how you grow. But we also need to make sure that the test that they're taking is assessed fairly so that we can understand where they are and where they need additional support.
I wanted to kind of finish up by talking about some Milwaukee specific issues. The state released an operational audit of the district last month with this 29-point overhaul action plan. Where's the accountability if you are the head of DPI? I mean, how do you ensure that this action plan gets in place at MPS?
Yeah, so we have a corrective action plan with them, and we do have some sticks, I suppose, if you want to look at the carrot stick kind of model, and we've been using them. I've been the only state superintendent in a long time that has held Milwaukee accountable for some of these issues. And the way that we're able to do it is, through corrective action plans. We meet with them so frequently. At one point, we were meeting with them daily, but I think we're meeting with them now 3 times a week to go over different corrective action items. And one of the things is if they don't, complete the things that they're supposed to do, we can withhold money from them. And we try to do so in a way that doesn't directly impact kids. It might be, funding that they would get that would be something that they would be able to pay off later. For example, if like we withheld special education money, we would do it at a certain time of year. So it wouldn't directly impact kids at that moment. But we've been very successful with that. So, by, threatening to withhold the money does seem to speed things up. But I think the piece of it that I think people need to understand is that this is a school district that has been underfunded for decades. And the workload that they have for their employees is incredibly intense. And there's a high level of expertise, the amount of reporting that they have to do. And their business office was understaffed, which put an additional burden on their employees. And so they were really behind. And we've been helping them out by just providing more support for them. We've been training employees for them, providing trainings, I should say. So, there's ways that we are helping them. I mean, we don't want to be a punitive agency. Our job has always been to support our school districts. And when we look at the future of Wisconsin, I mean, our future depends on strong public schools.
Jill Underly is Wisconsin's state superintendent. and is running for a second term. She spoke with WUWM's education reporter Catherine Kokel. Voters will decide between Underly and education consultant Brittany Kinser in the April 1st election. You can find more information about both candidates in our voter guide at WUWM.com.
You can find more interviews like this one by visiting WUWM.com/Lake Effect. And while you're there, subscribe to the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast.